talk to you about a subject that is dear to my heart. I'll be talking a little bit for a while over the next bunch of weeks about blocks to love. I mean, we all want to love and we want to be loved, but there are blocks to love. So this talk I titled when sometimes, I remember what I was said in my title, sometimes being right is just wrong. That's right. Sometimes being right is just wrong. Now, I think that one of the things I've seen more than any other block to love with couples is when both people get into a dialogue and they're trying to be right. I mean, I can't tell you the countless number of hours I've had with couples where their whole thing is about trying to prove to me who's right and who's wrong. And you know what? The truth is, they're both right. Most of the time, they're both right. They're both right in the sense that they're right from their perspective, their point of view, which is very different than the other person's point of view. When people say something, when they have an opinion or an interest, there's a reason why they have it. And they're coming from a place of honest feeling. Sometimes their position is something that is just a representation for what they're experiencing. So it may not actually be the real issue even. But what happens is when one person says, states their position about something, and the other person right away gets into the whole thing about you're wrong because of this, or I'm right because of this, that why it's wrong, the number one reason why it's wrong is because you've missed out on important information. You have missed out on knowing what's really going on with the other person. You may think that the first thing that person said to you is the essence of what that person's saying, but you don't know. You don't know. Here's my suggestion. My suggestion is that you give up trying to be right. Now, I know that is not easy. It's easier said than done. But just give up trying to be right, because you may have your turn in a while, but for right now, your partner is saying something that's very important to that person. So give up trying to be right. Give it up. And rather replace that with try to be interested. Be curious. Come from a position of maybe I don't know everything about this whole situation. I definitely don't know everything about you. And while you're taking an opposite stance from me, but there's something maybe very important about that opposite stance. And that person hopefully could do the same for you. So when we want to be right, it really blocks any of that information. And of course, it can escalate it, right? Because if the person comes to you with an opposing viewpoint and you right away try to prove they're wrong, not only maybe they're frustrated already before they started, but now they have to deal with the fact that you didn't hear them, you didn't listen to them, you didn't tune in. So it gets multiplied. How do you do that? Well, one of the things that I oftentimes do is I have couples, each partner of a couple, literally practice what I call the disarming technique. The disarming technique, when used, can absolutely transform a relationship, absolutely shift it very quickly, as a matter of fact. The catch is that you've got to act the opposite of your reflex. The reason why you are trying to be right is usually self-protective in some ways. We protect. We are more possessive of the way we think in our position than we are of money sometimes. We can see what's going on in the world and different people's ideas and thoughts. There's not a whole lot of listening going on, but then pulling it back to the couple, there's not a whole lot of listening going on. So it's literally the disarming technique is instead of going with that self-protective reflex of I want to be right, that you actually look for the truth in what the other person is saying. Even if it seems totally untrue, not totally, let's say mostly untrue or mostly unfair. I mean, there are those rare times when somebody says something that is so absolutely not true that it might be really difficult to look for any truth. But I could tell you this, that's unusual. most of the dialogues that committed couples have with each other, there's some truth in what the other person's saying if you look for it. So if your partner says, you don't seem to listen, you seem to do whatever you want to do, and you refute with, that's not true. There's so much I do for you. There's so much I do for you. Okay, that's me trying to be right. I'm proving you wrong. Well, how does that work for you? It doesn't work very well. It doesn't go very well. Now the other person feels invalidated. So let's take two, right? Take two. You have the person says, you don't listen. A lot of times you just don't listen to me or come through for me. You look for the truth of what that person is saying. I know that is the challenge, but you know what? No one ever promised you that having a healthy marriage or a healthy committed relationship is easy. And it takes some courage and it takes some emotional muscle. So you disarm that person. You look for the truth in what that person is saying. Even if you're thinking, God, it's so much I do for you. How could you say such a thing? Look for it. And you look for that truth and you stop trying to be right. And you say, well, as you look for it, you find it actually. And you go, I could see what you're talking about because I surely didn't listen to you here. And, in the last 5 weeks, there's only 3 times I took out the trash. I'm making this up as I go along. And the other 2 times I didn't. And I'm sure there are many other examples just like that where I didn't come through for you. Now you've looked for the truth. You haven't really said something that you don't believe. You just look for the other person's aspect of the truth. That person feels acknowledged, and it could actually lead to some really nice things. I've seen in my own marriage, as well as in many of the couples that I've worked with, that when people practice looking for the truth, they disarm the other person. They try to own as much of their own stuff. They look for ways they're wrong and the other person's right, the opposite. That what happens is the other person feels validated. Oftentimes it can end in a softening, maybe a hug, maybe a kiss, maybe an embrace. It can shift the whole mood between two people. It does seem miraculous, but what it really is you are not going with your self-protective mechanism of, I got to be right. You're going for the truth in what the other person is saying. You look for the quote-unquote rightness of what the other person is saying, and that oftentimes leads to some really great results. A lot of times, that is when the other person will look at their own stuff and say, I see your point too. Yeah, I probably overlooked all the good things you've done for me too. So that oftentimes is what will happen when you look for what is right in your partner rather than insist on being right yourself. So it's a block to love. You could remove it actually just like that by making a decision to disarm as opposed to defend your position. And it will go a long ways. That's all I have to say for now. This is Todd Creager, making the world safe for love.